Good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. It's good afternoon time in Innsbruck and in Munich, where one of our speakers is located. It's rather good morning in North Carolina, where the other speaker is located. So again, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you are. My name is Peter Nopp. I'm one of the directors in R&D at MED-EL headquarters in Innsbruck, and I'm the moderator of this Experts Online session today. This is about pitch and cochlear implants, which is kind of a not so easy, a bit complicated topic, but I hope that we'll really have a thrilling experience today. To start off, let's start with a few housekeeping issues, participant tips and tricks. Please name yourself in Zoom. Click on your name in the participants panel and click on more and rename. Please show your name, your organization, your country, whatever you feel comfortable with, so that we know who's online today, so that we can identify you if you want to ask a question later in the Q&A section. To avoid background noise, please mute your microphone if you do not speak. Just unmute your microphone if you speak and then go back to mute. And please mute your mobile phone. Mine is muted. I hope. I'll check. Yes, mine is muted. And for a stable internet connection, please close all other programs on your device if you don't need them, of course. Usually Zoom is a bit more stable and the video is a bit more smooth if there are not too many tasks running on your device, especially if it's a mobile device. And your comments and questions are welcome. Later in the Q&A section, please either raise your hand if you want to speak, or type a message in the chat. We'll get there. There is also English captioning available on your Zoom window. In the lower on the bottom of your Zoom window, there is a couple of buttons basically, and one says closed caption CC. If you click on this and you activate that button, then you should see the text that I'm speaking, or the transcript of what I'm saying in the lower third of your Zoom screen. It's automatic. Is it automatic? I think it's automatic, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good. Okay. In order to introduce all of you or get further into the matter, we have prepared a few Mentimeter questions. Mentimeter is a tool for online voting, online responding, things like that. And this is how you go on Mentimeter. You get your mobile phone out. You go to www.menti.com and you type in this code 13568561. Then you are on today's Mentimeter session. And then when it's time, you start voting. Or that's the code on the left again. Or you use your mobile phone and scan the QR code on the right, and then you'll get directly transferred to the respective Mentimeter session. So either you go to www.menti.com and you type in the code, or you scan the QR code. So please do so. Let's give you a short moment of time until you're all done. I'm not getting any feedback who's there already, so I'm just waiting for a few seconds more to allow people to get prepared. Again, either www.menti.com. Great, so we are there already. The first question, you're quicker than I am, you're quicker than me. Good. The first question is, what's your background? And this is just so that everybody knows who's in the audience in terms of people's knowledge maybe and background. So we have lots of audiologists, lots of audiology taken together, that's the majority. And then engineers, medical engineers, a few people from MED-EL, special needs educations, that's interesting, mechanical engineers, ENT doctors, that's great. I can't see any surgeons, but that is ENT. There should be one surgeon out there from Canada who really promised he'll be there. Anyway, he might not have had time and respond. Okay, good. So lots of audiologists. And this is, of course, something that is mainly interesting to audiologists, as it's lots about psychophysics and psychoacoustics. Okay, next question. The next question is about your experience. Have you ever been asked about how high a CI sounds? By CI users, by CI candidates, parents, teachers, whoever. Is that a question that you were asked many times or not asked many times? It's not a very obvious question, maybe. Most people might rather ask about speech perception, those kinds of things, not so much about pitch. Okay, that's really interesting. So it's rather more frequent than I thought, to be honest. We have about 80% on the yes side and about 20% on the no side. So 4/5 of you have already been asked at least once about how high a CI sounds. 3/4 we are now, and what 1/4 that wasn't ever asked about how high a CI sounds. Okay, very good. Thank you very much. That really shows that it is a relevant question, and having an answer to the question is relevant also. Now, a question about knowledge in a sense. What does pitch with the CI depend on? Does it depend on place of stimulation, on rate of stimulation, or on both place and rate of stimulation? Please respond. Please type in. Okay, a bit for place. Many votings for both place and rate. I'll just wait a few more seconds. Okay, good. So, yeah, okay. So it's around 95% for both place and rate, and about 5–6% for place of stimulation. The correct answer, it's both place and rate of stimulation. And I've prepared 2 slides because I really wasn't sure about how much people know about, well, the basics of the issue. And it is easier to understand the 2 presentations that you will be seeing later on if you know a bit about the basics. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. Again, I've prepared 2 slides that explain the basics. Pitch depends on place of stimulation. What you're seeing here on the slide is a range of curves which show pitch on the y-axis, which is what's called acoustic frequency here. Basically means pitch, or is a correlate to pitch. So it's pitch on the y-axis, increasing from lower to higher, and insertion angle on the x-axis, with the left of the scale of the axis being the apex, and the right close to 0 on the scale being base. So what I can see here is that pitch is high if you stimulate an electrode that is close to the base of the cochlea, and pitch then lowers increasingly as you move further into the cochlea. That is, as you increase insertion angle. So very clearly, I don't have a pointer, unfortunately, but very clearly, pitch depends on place of stimulation. Pitch depends on where an electrode contact sits in the cochlea. And that's basically the fundamental reason why we are all using cochlear implants with a certain number of channels that is associated with a range of electrode contacts that is spread across the cochlea. So that's the fundamental data, so to speak, behind multi-channel cochlear implants. Okay, pitch depends on place of stimulation. The next then is that pitch also depends on rate of stimulation. And that's what you're seeing here. On the y-axis, again, is pitch, and on the x-axis is pulse rate. And what you're seeing is different electrodes, different tested in a number of subjects. And as you can see, for all of those subjects, to lower or higher degree, pitch increases, i.e. the curve goes up, pitch increases with increasing pulse rate, which again means that higher pulse rate produces higher pitch, lower pulse rate on a certain electrode contact produces lower pitch. What you can also see on this slide is that in quite a few subjects, the curve saturates at about 300 pulses per second, maybe 400 pulses per second. But there are also subjects where pitch doesn't saturate as a function of rate up to 500, 600, 700 pulses per second. There is a number of papers out that show there is a wide range of pulse saturation limits. It's really not clear why that is, but it is clear that this fact exists. So again, pitch depends on rate of stimulation, and if you take both slides together, then we are at the correct answer to the previous question. Pitch depends both on place of stimulation and rate of stimulation. Okay, so far about the basics. Now this is what we're talking about today: pitch in cochlear implants, and the subtitle of the webinar or of the session today is how to create natural pitch with the cochlear implant. We have two distinct speakers that both did significant research about this issue, that both published significant and important papers about this issue, and that's the two speakers you will be seeing today. First is Tobias Rader, who is a professor and the head of audiology at the university hospital or one of the university hospitals in Munich, in the center of Bavaria, not too far from Innsbruck. And the second speaker is Margaret Dillman, who is an associate professor and the director of cochlear implant research at the School of Medicine at the University of North Carolina. So pretty far away. It's good afternoon to Tobias Rader, and it's good morning to Margaret Dillman. We'll start off with Tobias Rader. Tobias, can you please share your slides and start with your talk? And Tobias will be talking about place-dependent stimulation rates improve pitch perception in cochlear implants, in cochlear implantees with single-sided deafness. Tobias, the floor is yours. Toby, are you muted? We can't hear you.
So now you can hear me.
Okay,
yeah, sorry.
It's fine now. That's good.
So,
okay.
Hello, everybody. I feel very glad to have the possibility to talk to you about the topic of place-dependent stimulation rates and how it could improve the pitch perception in CI, and in this case, in single-sided deafness. If we hear, for example, a sinus tone over the CI, we have a lot of unknown issues. The first is we analyze the signal and we have the input filter banks, and then the center frequencies of the filter banks have certain center frequency, and then we have a CI electrode inside the cochlea, where we often don't know exactly on which place every electrical contact is located. And there we produce an electric stimuli in a certain rate. And this produces an electric field, and then we stimulate finally the acoustic nerve and have a kind of pitch perception. And we have a big question mark because we don't know exactly is the place of the cochlear implant electrode, is it the physiological correct place of the cochlea? And we don't know if the stimuli rate of the cochlear implant pulses are corresponding to the physiological correct rates. So if we look here at some Stanvers views for different electrode length, then you can see we have a different kind of insertion angle for the most apical electrode. And of course, we have to adjust the filter frequency to produce as best as possible pitch perception. So it's not that one size fits it all, so we have to adapt it individually for the patients. So the assumption is if the electrical stimulation rate of a CI electrode corresponds to the physiological pitch of the stimulation site, a better or more precise, more tonal, more accurate pitch perception is conveyed. What did we do in the experiment? We used single-sided deafness patients and stimulate on electrical on a CI electrode, a pulse train, and then the subject can adjust the acoustic pitch of a headphone to equalize it on both ears. We used normal hearing on one side, 11 CI patients, and they were implanted, of course, on the deaf ear, and we calculated the insertion angles and we calculated the corresponding rate. It means the place pitch according to the Greenwood function for the 6 apical electrodes. So we have, of course, different insertion angles for every subject and every electrode number, and we calculated, in our opinion, the most optimal rate for stimulation. Then they performed the pitch matching experiment and we recorded, of course, the results. And you can see here, look first on the left side, it's from the Schatzer paper. It's a fixed stimulation rate. That means if you use every electrode with 1,500 pulses per second, then you can see if the insertion angle is deeper in the lower frequency, it's more away from the Greenwood function. If you use the place-dependent stimulation rate, that means you use a lower stimulation rate in the more apical electrodes, you can see that the curves, the pitch curves, are much more closer and they are lying nearly directly on the Greenwood function. Another interesting point is if you look here, for the trials and for the fixed rate, now with 800 pulses per second and the place-dependent rate, then you can see the judgments are much more closer to the Greenwood function if you use a correct place-dependent rate in comparison to use a fixed stimulation rate. And if we have a look at the single individual subjects of a patient, of course, if you make this kind of experiments, you have to do 5 or more repetitions to get a good result. And if you look to the distribution of the individual trials, it's very interesting that if you use a correct adapted place-dependent stimulation rate, that the individual points are much more together and the distribution is much smaller for the electrodes than if you use a fixed rate. So if I can conclude my short presentation, you can say insertion angles are highly variable, especially in the apical region. It depends on the dimension of the cochlea and it depends on the length of the used electrode. And if we have electrode at insertion angles, they are deeper than 375 degrees, and we are using this place adapted stimulation rate, then we can see that pitch matches are much closer to the Greenwood function when the place adapted stimulation rates are used, and the variation of the individual matches, electric, acoustic, decreased. So thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Tobias Rader. Are you switching? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Tobias Rader. So what we've learned from this, if I can just briefly summarize, is if we carefully match stimulation rate and stimulation place, or if we adapt stimulation rate to stimulation place, that is, if we use on an electrode a stimulation rate that corresponds to the tonotopic frequency where the electrode sits in the cochlea, then stimulating that electrode produces a pitch percept, or produces pitch that is much closer to what a normal hearing subject would hear if you stimulated that place in the cochlea than if you stimulate an electrode or the same electrode as a constant rate. So exactly. In other words, sorry?
Exactly, yeah.
Right. Okay, just to summarize what Tobias said in a few words. Okay, thank you. Next is then Margaret Dillman. She did a study and then published her results on low frequency pitch perception in cochlear implant recipients with normal hearing in the contralateral ear. Margaret, please, the floor is yours. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, we can see it.
Great, thank you, Peter, for the invitation to present and share some of our team's data today. This is our team at the University of North Carolina, our cochlear implant team. We have a lot of collaborations between our clinicians and our researchers that have resulted in the work that I will be sharing today. So as we've discussed, we know that pitch can be derived from place coding, but also rate coding. For this piece of the presentation, I'm speaking specifically to place coding. So we know the cochlea is tonotopically organized with low frequencies resolved in the apex and high frequencies resolved in the base. And generally, our cochlear implant signal coding strategies take advantage of this by distributing the low to high frequency information, so that low frequency information is delivered to those more apical electrodes, and high frequency information is delivered to those more basal electrodes. However, there are differences in our cochlear morphology, and we know there are differences in the design and the length of the electrodes. And so that results in discrepancies between where the electrode is placed in a given cochlea and the natural cochlear place frequency. And so this creates a mismatch between what frequency information we're delivering and to the place frequency where we are delivering that information, and that is referred to as a frequency to place mismatch. Now, a few years ago, we looked to see how much does this matter, because we know that patients can acclimate to these discrepancies in what we are presenting in the cochlear place, so they can acclimate to frequency to place mismatches. And we wanted to see how much does this matter for our conventional cochlear implant patients, so patients that have moderate to profound sensorineural hearing loss in both ears. We randomized patients to receive either a long electrode array, the 31.5 millimeter array, which we would think would closely approximate the frequency information with cochlear place, compared to patients that received a shorter electrode array, where we knew there would be more mismatch than what would be observed with a longer electrode array. And what we found in this Buckman et al. 2014 paper is that the recipients of the longer array did better faster on measures of speech recognition than the recipients of the shorter electrode arrays. Eventually, some of the recipients of the shorter electrode arrays caught up to the performance of those with the longer array, but that was not complete in the majority of the sample by the 12-month interval. There was still this significant difference, particularly for speech recognition and noise. A few years ago, we decided to review that cohort's performance after long-term use, and we were still seeing significant differences in speech recognition out to 4 years. So we think that this mismatch could be detrimental for speech recognition over time, so both initially and over time. Sorry, that's moving on me. So one thing we wanted to investigate around the same time as we were learning about this, we were creating our clinical trial for patients that have single-side deafness. And so what we couldn't do in the Buckman study was to look to see what was their perceived pitch with the device. So how close really were we with those default filters to the cochlear place. What you can do with patients that have single-side deafness is you can measure directly their perception of what the cochlear implant sounds like, because they have this normal hearing ear that they can compare that sound to. And so when we designed that clinical trial, we decided to use exclusively the 31.5 millimeter array, with the idea that, one, we would closely approximate pitch in the implanted ear, but that we would also be providing an interoral pitch match between the two ears, which could support better binaural hearing performance. For this particular study, and what I'm sharing today is the subset of listeners that participated in that clinical trial that completed a pitch perception task, so that we could measure what they were perceiving with the cochlear implant, specifically the apical electrodes, as compared to their normal hearing ear. So the first objective was to assess the accuracy and acclimatization of low frequency pitch in these cochlear implant users with normal hearing in the contralateral ear who received that long electrode array. And then we compared the ability to use those electric fine structure cues. So rate cues on versus rate cues off. How much was that contributing, since we were close to place to begin with the long array? We had 19 subjects in this sample, and they had moderate to profound sensorineural hearing loss in the affected ear with poor word recognition preoperatively, and we defined that as 60% or less on CNC words. And they also had normal to near normal hearing in the contralateral ear from 250 to 8,000 hertz. Again, they all received the standard 31.5 millimeter electrode array, and they were all mapped with the FS4 coding strategy. So they all had those fine structure cues on the four most apical contacts. And they received the default filters of 100 to 8,500 hertz. Now, this methods that we use to measure pitch, we were delivering, or we were stimulating on one of the electrodes, on individual electrodes in the implanted ear, using the clinical software. So we would stimulate that single electrode. And then in the contralateral ear, when the listener was ready, they would have a pure tone or a click train introduced that was interleaved within the pulse train coming from the cochlear implant. So they would be hearing the stimulation from the cochlear implant, just like we do when we're mapping. And when they were ready, they would trigger it and it would be interleaved, and they would rank whether it was higher or lower in pitch compared to what they were perceiving with their cochlear implant. And the procedure was a 2 alternative forced choice pitch comparison. So again, they were telling us if it's higher or lower than what they're perceiving through the cochlear implant. And we had these 2 interleaved tracks that started higher and lower than the center frequency of the channel. And then they would converge as the patient would get closer and closer with their perceived pitch. We completed this task at the 1, 3, 6, and 12-month post-activation intervals. And then a subset completed repeated this task at the 12-month interval with fine structure cues turned off. So listening with the high definition continuous interleave sampling strategy that's presenting envelope cues only. So they're not receiving that rate cue. And this allowed us to compare perceived pitch on those apical channels with the rate cue on versus off. So first we have the data from the accuracy and acclimatization task. Again, as part of the clinical trial, they were all listening to the FS4 coding strategy that has fine structure presented on those 4 most apical contacts, and they all had the default filter frequencies of 100 to 8,500 hertz. What you see here is electrode 1 through electrode 5, because we were only looking at the low frequency pitch perception. And then what we have plotted on this axis is the normalized pitch. And what that is the perceived pitch, so the frequency of the perceived pitch by the center frequency of the evaluated channel. And this is reduced to the performance at the 1 month and the 12-month interval. And then we have the box plots with the individual performance that is overlaid on the box plots. And what the big take-home point here is that we're not seeing any difference in the perceived pitch that they had at the 1 month interval versus the 12-month interval. So there was this stable pitch between 1 month and 12 months. And so one of the takeaways was it could have been that they acclimated within those initial weeks, but because we didn't test it at initial activation, we're not sure. But some of the early performance benefits that we observed on measures of speech recognition and localization may have come from the fact that we were close to the cochlear place frequency to begin with, and there wasn't this need for a prolonged acclimatization period. These are the results from the comparison between the fine structure FS4 coding strategy and then HDCIS. So again, this was completed at the 12-month interval. In the white box plots, those are performance with the FS4 coding strategy, and then with the gray, that is the performance for the HDCIS coding strategy. An important point for all the audiologists in the audience is that when we switch them over to HDCIS, we confirm that the filter frequencies were the same. So this is a direct comparison of fine structure cues off versus on, and not shifts in pitch that happened acutely. But what we can see is a significant difference on E1, where we're getting further away with their perception when we take away the rate cue, and they are closer to that perceived pitch or to that place center frequency when we provide the rate cue. So the takeaway point from this is that these patients are benefiting from both place and rate information on these low frequency channels. So in conclusion, we see that low frequency pitch perception did not change significantly between the 1 and the 12-month post-activation intervals. And this could be related to minimal mismatches provided by that long electrode array when listening with the default filters. And electric fine structure cues, we see that those pitch matches on E1 were more accurate with FS4 than they were with HDCIS, so more accurate when we are providing the patient with place and rate cues. Thank you.
Great. Am I on? Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Many thanks to Margaret Dillman and Tobias Rader. If I may just summarize what I've learned in Margaret Dillman's talk. This is basically the continuation or building on what we've heard by Tobias Rader just before. If you stimulate an electrode not at a constant rate, but at a rate that corresponds to the frequency of the tone that people should hear, which in her study design was the center frequency of the stimulated channel, then people are closer in what they hear to what they should hear, namely the correct pitch of the tone, than if you stimulate an electrode with a constant rate. In other words, if you take away the fine structure cue. And the second very important message really is, and we might be doing a separate Experts Online maybe on that issue, is that people at least between 1 month and 12 months don't really show any adaptation in pitch, at least when equipped with a long electrode array and equipped with the FS4 coding strategy, which might indicate, as they're writing in the paper, that there aren't very significant pitch differences or pitch offsets between what people should be hearing or remember to have heard before they went deaf and what they are getting through a cochlear implant. Again, in this particular study, maybe due to the long electrode design and the use of the FS4 coding strategy. Okay, I hope that this short summary has maybe made the data a bit more clear even, or a bit clearer even. Okay, thanks a lot. Next, before we get into the Q&A, is a bit of fun, at least for those who love to be captured in a photograph. For the others, it's maybe, yeah, not so much fun, and you might not want to take part, and that's fine also. Then please switch off your camera. So please switch on your camera if you want to be on the group photo. Sorry, switch on your camera if you want to be in the group photo. They will now, they means the people from ICM that are helping me in this Experts Online will then switch to gallery mode, so that we should be seeing all those who want to be seen. A number of known faces, also a number of unknown faces. We can't get them all. I don't know, how many can we get on gallery mode? We're around 130 in this session. I don't think that we can get all 130 in gallery mode. Okay, guys, it's you now. Yes. Again, we're doing the best we can. There is certain limitations in Zoom, how many people you can see in gallery mode. Let me know when you're ready over there. Right? Okay. So now please smile, wave hands, whatever. Look friendly, look happy. Done? Yep. Okay. So the photography experts are reasonably happy with what we looked like. Okay, fine. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Can you go back to my slides? Okay. Okay, next is Q&A. Again, feel free to ask any questions, be it related to ask any questions to our speakers here, be they related to the presentations you've just seen, be they more basic in terms of what's pitch exactly or things like that, or how complicated is it to measure pitch or match pitch in an SSD user between electric and acoustics. Each question you want to ask, please. Can I see the chat? Please raise hands if you want to speak, or just unmute your microphone and start speaking. Let's not make things really complicated. Okay, we got our first question from Natalie. I'll just read the question. If we know the insertion angle, how would we make changes in the software to provide improved pitch representation? That's a good question, and there is an answer to this. Again, Tobias, Margaret, who wants to answer that question?
I can jump
yes,
in.
please. I know you're doing research in that direction.
Yeah, so I love this question because this is something that our team is investigating right now. We know even with the long electrode, there's variability in where we're presenting that frequency information relative to the cochlear place frequency. So the question of can we get better if we're incorporating some of that individual variability into the filter frequency assignments is just wildly interesting. So if you know insertion angle, then you can use that information by plugging it into either the Greenwood function or we're using the spiral ganglion function by Stokowskaya et al. From 2007. And you can calculate what that cochlear place frequency is. And then you can, adjust your filter frequencies within the software, at least the version that we have in the US right now, so that you are aligning the center frequency of that channel to that cochlear place frequency. And that's something that we're investigating right now to see what are the effects of some of those changes on speech recognition and binaural hearing performance.
Okay, maybe I can add. There is a tool that we from Medell just released. Well, just last year, which is called anatomy-based fitting, that exactly allows what Margaret just described. You can export information about where the electrode sits in the cochlea in terms of angle and frequency from the Otoplan software, and then import that information into Maestro, and then Maestro helps you, or Maestro provides a tool so that the filter band frequencies that are defined in the map are lined up or are adjusted to tonotopic electrode frequencies, and that's called anatomy-based fitting, and that's basically the study or the issue that Margaret's research is about. And we've also just recently discussed a similar study with Tobias, where we want to see whether the fundamental assumption that the pitch that an electrode produces equals tonotopic electrode frequency in the cochlea, which is basically behind all of those ideas, really holds, right? And I really look forward to your results, both Margaret's study on her version of anatomy-based fitting and the study on electrode pitch versus electrode angle or tonotopic frequency that we are still in the process of setting up with Tobias. So really, let's hope that in the next 1, 2, whatever 3 years, we really learn about how to better fit a cochlear implant in terms of frequency or pitch. Can I just, before we go into the next, well, no, let's go into the next question, and I'll reserve my question for later. It's your time to ask questions and not mine. Okay, can you yeah, okay. I'll go, Natalie, I'll go into your question in a minute, okay? Is that okay? Okay, Gabriel is asking, have you worked with anatomy-based fitting, and what's your opinion? Does anybody of you just respond to that question quickly, or?
Yeah, I have tried in different ways. I have tried to use the tool, the Otoplan software, and this other way I did it is when I calculated the insertion angles and calculated the corresponding frequency and shifted the center frequencies in the fitting software to the corresponding frequencies. And it is for the CI patients, it's different, but it's not complete clear if it's solve the problems for every patient or only for some who are more sensitive to pitch effects or so. I think we have to do a lot of research in this topic.
Okay. Margaret, do you have an answer to that question also?
So I haven't used the anatomy-based fitting the way it is in the software. We're doing it a little bit differently, as you described. So our study is recruiting new cochlear implant users. So we're randomizing them at initial activation to either receive the default filters or what we refer to as place-based fitting, but same idea of you take the cochlear place frequency and you use that to come up with your filter frequency assignments. And we're doing this for both cochlear implant alone and EAS users. So I saw there was an EAS user question and got pretty excited about that one. Yeah. And some of our early data is suggesting that speech recognition is better for those that have a place-based map, so a map that you've resolved these frequency to place mismatches as you would with the anatomy-based fitting, compared to those that have default maps where you have more of these spectral shifts in the information. Now, the big question is, do the ones with the default map catch up to the performance of those with the place-based map? And that's what we're currently evaluating.
Okay. So, so there is indications that this might be a useful tool, at least in some, but we are really early in investigating frequency fitting, so to speak. Yeah, so far we have fitted cochlear implant users in terms of loudness mainly. Maybe also in terms of timbre by pushing the low frequency channels up or B or the high frequency channels down, but pitch or frequency hasn't really been a fitting parameter so far. And I think we're really just in an early stage to see of learning how frequency could be fitted as well as loudness is fitted in the CI already. Okay, can we go? Okay. Can one use anatomy-based fitting on EAS patients? Tobias.
Yeah, of course you can do it. Now, on the one hand, if we use EAS patients, we can estimate the crossover frequency, the acoustic crossover frequency, how much residual low frequency hearing we have with the audiometry, and to fit it to the shorter EAS electrodes, you can use, of course, anatomy-based fitting, because you have a better advice to what pitch the electrodes are corresponding. So of course, I think it's fun. It's the nice thing in anatomy-based fitting that we don't have to know so much about the electrodes also, because we measure the electrode places, and then we can adapt or shift the frequency ranges to the correct place. Yeah.
Margaret, I think you also have a bit to say about EAS.
Yeah, this is my favorite topic right now.
Okay.
But I think this is the EAS fitting and the role of imaging and how we are fitting EAS patients is going to be one of the places where we see a big impact for what audiology can do. Because right now with the fitting of EAS, if you think about it, Our recommendations are based off of small sample sizes, and we're really just using the audiogram to drive what we're doing electrically and acoustically. And by knowing where we are with the electrode array and incorporating that into programming, this could be a major impact for some of our EAS users, because the acoustic hearing could be serving as an anchor to cochlear place. So that is, it could be harder for somebody who has mismatch to acclimate to that when you've got low frequency hearing being resolved in that natural place. And that could be why we see some wide variability in EAS user performance. It's because some are further away from the cochlear place frequency with their electrode than others. The other thing that is very interesting about the fitting of EAS patients when you know angle is it could be you have an electrode that's within the region of acoustic hearing, and we're finding that this is more prevalent in our patient population than we expected. And we know from some work that this can cause electric on acoustic masking. So you actually could be taking away the benefit of that low frequency acoustic hearing because you're not overstimming, but you're providing electric information in a region that could be responding acoustically. And so if you can control for that in your mapping, then you could provide this individualized map to this patient that could provide them with better speech recognition than they would have if you just use the unaided information alone. Get very excited about that topic.
Okay. So EAS. So what I'm hearing is that EAS fitting is more complicated even than fitting of a regular CI, because you
or more fun.
You have the additional complication of matching electric and acoustic, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes,
and
I would say that's why a lot of us went into audiology, right? You're wanting to improve patient performance, and now you're using what you know about acoustic hearing, you know about electric hearing, and you're combining those pieces together to come up with a tailored map that can ultimately provide these patients with better performance.
Okay, good. There is a couple of fresh questions. Can you just we have one question that is about by Sabrina, that is about the basics. Can we have this question a bit later, because the next question more closely relates to the issue of fitting that we talked about so far. It's by Nopp. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, and he's asking, or she's asking, how helpful can this method be in a deformed cochlea, for example, hypoplastic? Now, does anybody from you have, Margaret, Tobias, does anybody have experience with cochlear place-based fitting or place-based fitting, anatomy-based fitting in a deformed cochlea, hypoplastic cochlea?
So we're back to guessing with that, because
which is fine. It's educated guessing at least, right?
So the reason is because using the current place functions to come up with the cochlear place frequency are based off of a normal anatomy, and so it makes it more complicated to actually calculate what that cochlear place frequency is. Tobias,
you want to add a comment?
I think it's the same. So if you have a malformed or a malformed cochlea, you don't know where the frequency or the nerve fibers are. So I think this would be or will be always a special case for fitting in the future, where you have to compare the single electrodes and make a matrix, and looks like which electrodes produce a higher pitch and which electrodes a lower pitch, and then we are happy. To go one step further and adapt the stimulation rates, I think it's very difficult in these patients.
Right. So it's basically similar to ABIs, where you don't really know the tonotopic organization of electrode contacts, and you would need some experiment to find out in a patient with a malformed cochlea about how exactly are the channels organized tonotopically, then define the corresponding filter, for example, for each channel. So I also think that's a more complicated issue. The anatomy-based fitting that's currently implemented in Maestro really fits to a normal cochlea. So Greenwood function, all of those equations, and the same holds for Otoplan. So Greenwood function and all of those things that are used there to convert millimeters into angles and angles into frequencies. That's all for the normal cochlea. And I think that's the same for your research, Margaret, right?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Good. Can we go back to the questions? Yeah. Okay. No. Okay. So then let's go back to Sabrina's question. I'm just reading the question. Sorry, I missed the first presentation. Perhaps I missed the information regarding rate pitch. As far as I understand, in normal hearing, phase locking is thought to work on nerve fiber group level, as refractoriness limits the maximum firing rate of a single nerve fiber. How is it thought to work in CI patient? Doesn't the charge used in CIs make all nerve fibers refractory? Where is the limit for rate pitch in CIs? So this is more about the basics. Does anyone want to respond here? Yeah. It's not really strictly related to your research, but does anyone want to explain to, what's her name?
I can say some words. If we
Sabrina.
If we have the very low frequency stimulation, then we use very slow stimulation rates from 100 pulses per second or so. And I think then there are enough nerve fibers who are not in refractory. So of course, if you go up to the higher stimulation rates, higher than 500, 600, 700 pulses per second, we have seen it's a little different in the patient population. Then of course we don't have the refractory, but I think if we go to the higher frequencies, to the higher stimulation rates, then it's a kind of statistic that some neurons can fire on the given stimulus electric and some on the next and so on, that you have a kind of interleaved phase locking even for higher stimulation rates than 500 pulses per second. So we have seen it in our study. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Margaret, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just trying to think of some of the work that's been done of where that upper frequency is of what you can do for using the rate cue, and I was thinking it was around 300 or 400, but couldn't think of if it was Schatzer or Oxenham or Chatterjee. One of those have really delved into that. Yeah.
I just remember a paper from a few years ago from Cambridge, from Bob Colline, who really showed that the rate frequency limit really varies quite a bit between subjects. There are the ones that have a relatively strict rate limit at 300 pulses per second. Others range up higher or reach up higher. It's really, as far as I can see, it's really not clear. Neural survival will be an important factor. The more neurons, the more nerve fibers that you can stimulate, the higher that frequency saturation limit or rate saturation limit should be, as you have more nerve fibers that can respond to a certain subset of the pulses you present. There is also the theory that if people use higher chronic stimulation rate, then they also reach up higher in that experiment compared to people that use a lower chronic stimulation rate, maybe by using another system than the MED-EL. So there is a few hypotheses about why we are seeing differences, like you've seen in the slide that I showed in terms of pitch saturation limit, but I don't think that the matter is really sorted out conclusively so far. Okay, we are getting closer to 4 o'clock Innsbruck time, 10 o'clock North Carolina time. Can I just ask, is there any final question? We would have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Yeah, interesting one, an interesting one. Do you create a program for music during bilateral or single-sided EAS or CI fitting? Which parameters do you prefer? Do you prefer rate, duration, strategy, compression to create a music program, or do you have a procedure? That's an interesting thing. I think there are people demanding a music program. I don't know how frequent this is. I'm really also not sure how frequently people then use their music program. Margaret, Tobias, does anyone have an answer to this? It's about creating a music program in a CI user.
So I would say with what that's where the benefit of individualizing the filter frequencies could be very beneficial. And that's something that Charles Lim's group is doing, is looking at the influence of individualizing the filters on music perception, so not just speech perception. So typically with our group, when we're creating music maps, we're not necessarily making these huge changes, because our theory has been that it's better to create a really good single map that they're using in their everyday life, and they're not constantly making all these switches being in different situations. So my thought with music perception is this could be where the individualizing the filter frequencies can also be beneficial, not just for speech.
Okay. Tobias, do you want to add something? I know you have fitted a piano player. Well,
yeah, I think for each patient there is one optimal map, and if you are able to fit the patient to his individualized optimal maps concerning to the filter frequencies, to the how wide the filter banks are, and I think it's also the best for speech perception, because then you use optimal all frequency steps in the electrical stimulated hearing. And I have done it in a few months ago. It was patient bimodal, and he got his first CI, and he plays very good piano, and he looked about the frequency ranges where the tonotopic on the piano sounds the same in the pitch. And then I adapted the frequency bands of the input filter frequencies, and this had improved very much the sound perception for these individual patients. So and he uses the program in the everyday and for everything, for music, for speech, for everything. So I think it's not necessary for all patients to have a special music program. For example, if you use a very high compression for some patient, then it could be useful to lower the compression for music, to have more dynamic in the input channel. But for the majority of the patient, I think we have to find this one special map and use everything we can do.
That's exactly the art of fitting, right?
Yeah.
You find the one sweet spot for each patient, and that's really, I think, the art of fitting, and that what requires a lot of gut feeling and experience by the audiologist. But maybe, with the technologies coming up, like receiving information or gathering information where exactly the electrode sits in the program, in the cochlea. Maybe those bits of information that we didn't have in the past, right, really help us a bit further and make the task a bit easier of finding that sweet spot for each individual user. Okay, thank you very much. I think we're at the end. We're at the end of the session today. Thank you very much to everyone out there. Thank you very much to Margaret Dillman at UNC and Tobias Rader in Munich for their presentations, for their time, and for the discussion. And let me, as the last point on my agenda, let me just introduce or advertise briefly the next Experts Online session. The next Experts Online session will be on February 9, again from 3 to 4 o'clock Central European time. And it'll be about SSD, 2 years of benefits and counting, cochlear implants in children with SSD. And speakers will be Kevin Brown and Lisa Park. Okay, that concludes the Experts Online for today. Again, thank you very much. Have a nice day or rest of the day and stay healthy. Bye-bye from Innsbruck.